Thank you for joining me for another video. Last week we talked about the construction of the ark a little bit. We didn't really talk about the logistics of the ark, and that's what we're going to talk about this week. We did, however, discuss that the possibility of the ark, rather than being timber, cut trees that have been fashioned into planks, rather than that, there's a very real chance, a very likely chance, that it was actually built out of reeds that were just sort of bundled together, coated over with pitch to make them watertight, and then just sort of fashioned together as if they were timbers, wood planks. But we're not going to get into that this week because, as I said, we're going to get into the logistics of the ark a little bit. So let's go ahead and jump into that. And just for the record, I just want to throw out there before we get into the text that there are some Jews, and it appears to be a fairly sizable population of Jews who, like myself, see the potential there for the ark to have been built of reeds as opposed to cut wood, planks and whatnot. And also there seems to be a substantially larger amount of Christians who are willing to accept that, as well as Muslims who are willing to accept that. And I think that's great. It shows that this is a plausible possibility that bridges religious divisions. Now, if only we could take that and apply it to things like building, a peaceful world. We could have world peace by tomorrow if everyone just unites behind the idea that perhaps Noah's Ark was made of reeds rather than wood. Of course, I'm joking, but that's it's an interesting thought to think about if that's what unites the world. Anyways, let's jump into it. Last week, we finished up with verse 16. I don't really have a lot to go over this week, but we are going to finish up this chapter. So we're going to be in verse 17, and we're going to read through verse 22, which is the final verse. So it says, verse 17, ואני הנה מביא את המבול מים על הארץ לשחט כל בשר אשר בו רוח חיים מתחת השמיים כל אשר בארץ יגוע. So it says that, this is God speaking. He says, and I, behold, I'm bringing the flood of water, and it's funny that it says that, the flood of water, or the flood waters, perhaps. It's interesting because we're actually laying a Jewish group, so we're going to talk about, not this week, maybe not next week, but the week after, in the middle of the week, about 2,000-ish years ago or so, who took this verse and said, well, God destroyed the world with water once. Perhaps there will also be a flood of fire in the future, at the end of days. And that is, if you're wondering where Christianity got it from, they were probably heavily influenced by those groups that did exist in Second Temple times, which was right about the time of Jesus. It's even possible, I'm not going to get into that today, but it's even possible that some of Jesus' disciples actually were a part of one of those sects that believed that potentially the world would be destroyed by fire in the future. And it's interesting, just a side note, it is interesting that scientifically speaking, in a few million years or so, give or take a couple of days, the sun is actually going to expand as it dies. It's going to expand and engulf the planet Earth in fire. So, just an interesting thought. I say fire, it's not really fire, it's the sun. But, it is what it is, right? Essentially, from our perspective, it's fire. So it says, God says, and I, behold, I'm bringing a flood of water, or the flood waters, on the earth or on the land. I prefer land. I would even go so far as to say it could be country. Um, to destroy all flesh, in which is a breath of life from under the heavens. Everything that is on the earth will expire. It'll all die. Verse 18. Wahakim, there we go. Wahakimoti et brithi othach uvata el hateva ata uvanecha veishtecha unashe vanecha itach. So it says, and I will establish my covenant with you, and will bring you to the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Umikol hai mikol basar shnaim mikol tavi el hateva lehayoth itoch zachar unkeva yiyu. So it says, this is God speaking again. He says, and from all that is alive, from all of flesh, two of each one, each species, you should bring into the ark to preserve it with you, to keep it alive with you. And then it goes on to state that they should be male and female. And I just think that that's an interesting detail for the Torah to include. God's just like, yeah, make sure you've got animals, so that they don't all die. But, just make sure that you've got male and female so that, they don't all die. Because without a male and a female, doesn't matter how many you bring. If you've just got all males or all females, you're going to have a serious population issue with the next generation. Namely, that there will be no generation after this. What did I just finish up with? Okay, so in verse 20. Me'arov leminahu u min habehma leminah mikol remes האדמה למיניהו שניים מכל יבואו אליך להחיות. So he says, God again speaking, says, from each bird, from every bird according to its kind, and from every animal, this is behemah, this is a domestic animal, each according to its kind, and from everything that creeps on the ground, after its kind, two of everyone, two of each, shall come to you to preserve, to keep alive. Verse 21, وَتَكَخْ لَخَا مِكَلْ مَأَخَلْ أَشْهِرْ يَأَخِلْ وَأَصَفْتَ إِلَيْخَ وَهَيَّا لَخَا أُلَهَمْ لَأَخْلَى. So God continues to give him these are really important details. I'm chuckling a little bit because of how the Hebrew looks, but it says, and you should take for yourself every food that's eaten and gather it into you, and it should be food for you and for them, or it should be for you and for them as food. It just really depends on how literally you want to translate that. Lost my place. Verse 22. Vayas Noach ככל אשר ציווה אותו אלוהים כן עשה. So it says that Noah did like everything that God commanded him, that he did. כן עשה, so he did. So it's interesting, there are a couple of things that I just want to point out. The Torah does say that God wanted Noah to bring 2 of every kind of animal, but later, I believe it's in the next chapter actually, I believe it's actually early in the next chapter, God refines his instructions to where it's not just bring a single pair of each animal, but 7 pairs of every clean animal, that would be every kosher animal, and 1 pair of every unclean, non-kosher animal. Okay, the fact that there is a distinction here between what is clearly surprising, because Jews are really interested in that sort of detail. So it really shouldn't surprise you that we included that in the Torah, and by we, clearly I mean Moses, but it does show that perhaps that distinction, and we already had a working tradition of what was clean and what was not clean. So I'm not going to talk about that too much, because it's all speculation at this point. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Let me scroll up on my notes right quick. Okay, so I'm going to let you in on a little disagreement that's been going on for the last probably 2,000 years or so, at least, within the Jewish world. As it pertains to the story of Noah and the flood. So we know that Jews love to disagree with each other about everything, and that's great because we can disagree and still look at each other as being brothers. But at the same time, it also kind of muddies the water a little bit. It makes things a little bit confusing for everyone who's on the outside looking in, and it's especially difficult for those who are either new to Judaism, or they are perhaps of Jewish descent, but they weren't raised Jewish, and that's actually the boat that I fall into. I was born Jewish. I had the good luck to be born Jewish, but not enough good luck to have been raised in Judaism. So basically everything that I learned, I had to learn it, once I returned back to the Torah. But maybe we'll get into my, let's call it my origin story in a future video. Maybe, I don't know, it just depends. It is sort of a personal matter, but maybe I'll share it. If we were in person, yeah, for sure, I'd have no problem sharing it. But putting it out on the internet, well, that's a different story. I've still got to think about it. I've still got to think about where I want to fit that in. So, let's talk about that disagreement. There are 2 opinions about the flood itself. There is one opinion that says that it was a truly global flood in scope. So we're talking about every single square inch of land, every grain of sand out there on the planet, every rock, every tree, every bush, every blade of grass, anywhere in the world was completely and totally covered by water. That is I believe that's actually the maximalist position. And it has a set of problems associated with it. Then there is the opinion that the flood was regional in scope. There are significantly less problems that are associated with that one, and those issues are really quite easily resolved. And we're going to get into that a little bit today. Fair disclosure, I do side on the regional flood model. I used to actually believe in a global flood model, but after having seen all the evidence for myself, seeing that it's just not feasible for a truly global flood, I go where the evidence takes me. If that takes me to some place other than where I am now, okay, fine, I can grow. I can move with the evidence. So take a look at my notes right quick. Yeah, so there was a flood some time ago, according to the book of Genesis, and the global flood model has every grain of sand being covered by at least 15 cubits of water all across the world. Now, the first and most obvious issue that's going to come up with that, and if you've sided for any amount of time on the global flood model side, you're probably very well acquainted with this issue, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. If you have anything to add. The issue that comes up is, quite frankly, where did all that water come from, and where did it go? Because we know, whenever a specific area floods, right? So I live in the Orlando area. Every hurricane that comes through, we get hammered, but we don't get like destroyed in the Orlando area. We just get a lot of rain, and it causes a lot of flooding. Causes the internet to go down. It causes the power to go out in some areas. It just really depends on how well the infrastructure holds up, right? But we do get flooding, and so we know where all that water comes from. It comes from rain, right? We also have a river here in the Orlando area. We have several lakes that are fed by that river. We have several lakes that are man-made lakes, and when we do get that sort of rain, they flood as well. Probably one of my most exciting, if I could say that about hurricanes, incident with a hurricane was I was actually driving across the Lake Jesup Bridge on the 417, and if you know the Orlando area, you know where that is. This was shortly after the hurricane, the last hurricane that came through. I think it was Hurricane Ian. It flooded some of the houses that were right there on the lake, and I thought that was just an amazing display of the power of the forces of nature. Bad for them, right? But for me, I was just kind of awestruck. I was just like, wow, man, that's awesome. Because like this is Lake Jesup is a lake that's fed by a river, and there are houses that go down right to the shoreline. And now these houses, their first floors are underwater. Now a couple of them I noticed were actually built that way. They were built up on stilts because those guys were smart. They were expecting a flood. Because they know what Florida is like, but then there were others that were only one story, and unfortunately the people who live there probably lost pretty close to everything in that flood. Just the damage that would have been caused by the water alone is just outrageous. Not to mention the alligators who, would probably have gone inside the homes, because alligators are... Lake Jesup holds the distinction of being the most densely packed alligator population in the entire United States, which isn't really saying much because there's only like a handful of states that have alligators. So I just thought that was interesting. Now, look back at my notes because I'm a little bit off topic here. So, where did all that water come from, and where did it go to? Well, in the global flood model, the best explanation that I've heard is that the mountains were much lower back then. The entire planet was relatively flat, and by that I don't mean a flat Earth. I mean a just like low hilly region at most, not large mountain ranges, like the Rockies, the Himalayas, the Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Fuji. None of these mountains, according to this opinion, existed at that time, at least not at the height that they are now. they were transformed and ultimately arose as a result of the intense pressure of the floodwaters. My problem that I have with that is that explains how the water covered the planet. It doesn't explain where the water came from, because if you have a flood that's this wide of a scope, you're looking at spending a whole lot of money to research something that's just not a feasible model, in my opinion. Because how did the water get on the land? Oh, it rained. Okay, so it rained. Oh, and the springs of the deep burst forth, the text says, because it does. Okay, so that explains some of the water. It doesn't explain what kept it from doing that before. So that's a big issue, and I haven't heard a reasonable explanation for it. I haven't heard a good explanation for it. Okay, I'm not saying that it's impossible yet, but I'm not seeing any evidence to support that idea. Now, to be fair, though, and this is something that anyone can point out, to be fair, a lack of evidence does not necessarily mean that it has solid evidence against it. Okay, it could just be that we haven't found that evidence yet. Okay, but in all honesty, though, the global flood model does present more problems than it solves. Okay, the second opinion, much smaller in scale, is the one that I hold to, that it was just a regional flood. Okay, now this solves the issue of where the water came from and where it went, which is, I mean, all the obvious places, rivers, lakes, streams, the ocean, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the planet is something like 73% water. Okay, it's a lot of water. Where did it all come from? Well, I mean, there's a lot there. The real question is not where did it come from, but how did it get on land? And that we're not going to discuss in this video. That'll be a later video. Okay. But the regional flood model does present another problem, at least in English, right? So in English, we come across this passage and it says that the flood was on the earth, that the flood wiped out all life on earth, right? That's somebody's opinion. Okay, because the word that it translates there as earth is the word ares, and it means land. Dry land. It could mean a country, it could mean a region, it could mean the world in the sense of the world's land masses. What has not been historically proven, or biblically and historically proven, I should say, is whether or not the word really applies to the earth as a planet. Meaning a sphere, yes, I said it, a sphere floating in space. Any flat earther who's watching this, you need to understand that the earth has been demonstrated to be a sphere. Okay, you're going to disagree with me, you're going to freak out, do your thing, and, turn it off, and that's fine, I guess. But, just maybe listen. You might learn something. And by you might learn something, I mean you might learn something that somebody else believes. I'm not saying you have to believe it. I'm saying, it will help you understand and relate to others a little bit better. That's my opinion on it. That's how I've always understood things like that. Now, the region of the flood appears to have accidentally been discovered by Sir Charles Woolley about 100 years ago. Okay, it was a little bit more than 100 years, like 110 years ago or so, between 1912 and I think 1916, which is funny because that puts it right in the middle of World War I. That's exciting. That must have been really exciting. He was out there excavating in Louisiana rock to be fair, most of the fighting probably, most of the fighting I'm familiar with anyway took place in the trenches in Europe, so he was probably safe-ish, but, colonialism overflows into the colonies, and war erupts there. So early 20th century, he discovered a massive region that was a huge floodplain in the area where we place Noah, in the area where the Torah places Noah. And I think that that's interesting. I think that that is a boost to the Torah's narrative. Now, to be fair, both models have support in the Talmud. You have some rabbis who say, oh yeah, for sure, man, it was a global catastrophe. It was a global flood. Every square inch of land around the planet was completely submerged by at least 15 cubits of water at the same time. Again, I'm not finding any evidence to support that. If you know some, please let me know. I am interested in learning about that as well. Then there's also some Talmudic support. Some rabbis said, no, it was a regional flood. And I think it's interesting that some rabbis actually go so far as to say, no, I mean, the flood waters came as far as here. You're just like, oh, okay. How did you know that? But I don't have time to get into that. Presumably there was a tradition that that area was spared. I don't know. I just think that it's very interesting. One of the opinions actually that you're going to find in the Talmud is that the land of Israel itself was never flooded. And that does seem to be supported by archaeology. But again, we're not getting into the archaeology or anything this week. That's for a later video. In any case, though, both models do have hurdles to overcome. So today we're going to talk logistics. Okay, the Torah is very specific about the dimensions of the ark. Okay, there is a little bit of playroom with what a cubit equals in modern measurement systems. Okay, I assume that we're talking about 18 inches. Okay, this is the cubit I'm familiar with. That's what I assume we're talking about. There are some opinions that say, well, it's 20 inches. I think the most I saw at one time was a 22-inch cubit. Would love to see the guy that was based on, because a cubit, by definition, is between the crook of the elbow to the furthest tip of your finger, right? So when you're fingers out there. So in my case, middle finger. Some people actually have other fingers that are even longer or same length as the middle finger. I think that's just an interesting variation, interesting genetic variation within our species. I think that's cool. I think things like that are really cool. But beyond just that, that playroom when it comes to measuring a cubit, there's really not much playroom. Okay, the Torah defines the ark, or it gives the dimensions of the ark, I should say, as being 300 cubits by 30 cubits by 50 cubits, right? So 300 long, 50 wide, 30 high, right? So we're talking, this is a massive boat. It's huge, all right? Let's just throw that out there. It is huge, gigantic boat, okay? For those of you in the United States, you're looking at it as long as a football field. Perhaps as wide. So we're talking like a football stadium, right? For those of you in the United States. Elsewhere in the world, I don't know. You guys, I guess, just use the metric system. I guess. But I think all Americans would rather use anything other than the metric system. So football field. Okay. Do you have any idea how many ducks that is? Man, no, I'm just kidding. Do you know how many cheeseburgers that is? So now we've got to worry about, now that we've got dimensions of the ark set, and we know that it had 3 stories within it, now we have to worry about cargo space for animals and food, okay? All the logistical stuff, not very interesting stuff if you're not really into that kind of a thing, but if you are into, minute details of it all, yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. Now, if we assume that the region that Sir Woolley's flood covers is the floodplain from this particular flood, and God told him to bring animals specifically from that region, you're looking at individual animals between 396 and 840. That's individual animals, most of which are actually going to be relatively small in size. Okay. Let me go ahead and read this next part too. If we assume a global flood, we're looking at between 91,000 and 196,000 individual animals on the ark. Now that variation there, that gap between the low and the high numbers, that's assuming that low numbers there, we're talking those that are regional to that area, and what exactly counts as a species, and as opposed to just a subspecies or a variation of another species, and also when it comes to a regional flood, any migratory animals that would have been in the area, were they included, were they not? We're not told in the text. Presumably, any migratory animals that were in the area when the flood showed up, Noah brought them on. Presumably. Okay, I think we could safely assume that to be the case. Now, again, that is only counting land animals and birds, right? So we're talking terrestrial mammals, amphibians, reptiles, birds, creepy crawlies, bugs, that sort of a thing, right? Scorpions, arachnids of all sorts. I would love to have been the guy who lost the termites, on the ark. That would have been hysterical. It's a joke. I hope that didn't happen. So long story short, if we're talking about a regional flood, the ark would have actually been big enough to house all those different individual animals. If we're talking about a truly global flood and we had, let's just say, 91,000 individual animals on the boat from all over the world, well, that's an issue because they're not all going to fit. We're looking at less than 0.2 meters squared per animal, and that's an issue. That's a pretty serious issue because we're talking, tiny. Okay, so we're talking inches here. Okay, this is down in the inch range. So global flood theory, or the global flood model, I should say, the fact that the animals could not fit on the ark, in my opinion, that is the final nail in the coffin to that model. But there are other issues to consider, because now we also have to consider food. If, assuming a regional flood again, if we have enough space for the animals, is there enough space for the food and crew quarters as well? And the answer is yes, if you do it correctly. Okay, which tells us, I think this is just a very interesting thing, it tells us that Noah was also the very first recorded engineer, because he had to figure out how to store everything to make it to where it wouldn't be an issue. The global flood model, obviously, since it can't contain all the animals, there's no way you're going to get all the food in there on it. So it would take some doing, it would take some effort, but in a regional flood model, yes, there would be enough space for both animals and food, and the humans that are on it as well. Interestingly enough, humans are the only species on the boat that are neither clean animals nor coming in only a single male-female pair. Just thought that was kind of cool. So the remaining issue in terms of logistics, we're talking about would the crew of 8 people, assuming 8 people, I assume it's 8 people because the text implies heavily that it's only 8 people, could theoretically have been more if Noah and his sons, if any of them had more than one wife, but we're going to assume only 8 people. Is it possible for them to be able to feed all these animals while they're on the ark and get them their meals at the right times? And the answer is yes, but it would be pretty difficult. They'd basically have to work in rotating shifts and really honestly wouldn't have much free time, which may be why there's actually a tradition that says that while they were on the boat, they weren't allowed to, have marital relations with each other, which also makes sense from a, just the stress standpoint, in addition to things like cleanliness, privacy, that sort of thing, right? Now, for the global flood model, it's just not physically viable. Okay, barring a miracle, you're just not going to get anything anywhere near what it should be to, be able to take care of all those animals for such a long voyage. However long the voyage was, and we're going to get into why I said that later on. Now, I specifically said barring a miracle because proponents of the global flood theory, the global flood model, are going to, if pressed, if shown that the evidence basically says that it's physically impossible, they are very oftentimes the type of people who will, not that it's a bad thing, I actually quite like it, it's not meant to be a slight against them in any way, but they will oftentimes resort to saying, oh, a miracle occurred. And miracles are great. I love miracles. Miracles are fun. They're especially fun when it comes down to, working out how they happened. But the text doesn't say anything about a miracle, and it's usually pretty upfront about it. So the text doesn't say anything about a miracle. So I think it's safe to say that there was probably no miracle. I could be wrong, though. So listen, I'm done. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm not telling you, you have to believe it like me. I'm not even, I'm not even preaching, the gospel according to St. Judah, I guess. Oh, that could actually be a real gospel. That could actually, I'm gonna write one now. I'm just kidding. So I'm not telling you, hey, you've got to believe like me. No, there's plenty of room for disagreement. There's plenty of room for scholarly debate. There's plenty of room for, listen, both possibilities have strengths and both have weaknesses, okay? I think, this is my opinion, I think that there is truth in both of them. I just think that on a literal scale, a literal approach to it, a regional flood is more viable, and it frankly requires less miracles, right? Occam's razor, the simplest answer, the one that requires the least amount of assumptions, that one's probably the truth. So that's what's going on here. Anyway, that being said, I am done. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I should have another video posted this week during the middle of the week. So until next time, shalom. Cut.